Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Qualtrics XM Community Podcast. I'm Michael Cooksey. I'm the head of community here at Qualtrics, and I am very, very excited today to be joined by one of my favorite colleagues. I know I shouldn't play favorites, but Sabina Alteras-Honig is here. And we are very, very excited to talk to everybody today about all things UX going on at Qualtrics. Before we get started, I just want to highlight to everyone that the Badge of the Month program is active for August. If you haven't taken part already, please do so. We added a productivity playlist to the Qualtrics XM community homepage. Sabina, this might be something you're interested in as well as a
Okay.
musician. We're asking all of our community members to contribute their favorite tunes to our productivity playlist and share their favorite songs with the community. And everybody's having a great time taking part in the Badge of the Month program this month.
I
So
love
if
that.
you haven't already, be sure to take part in our Badge of the Month program. It happens every month on the Qualtrics XM community. So Sabina, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. So, Sabina, for those of you who did not watch our previous conversation that we had on the XM community, would you mind telling our audience a little bit about yourself and what you do here at Qualtrics?
Yeah, of course. My name is Sabina Alteras-Honig, and I am the manager of our UX research team at Qualtrics. I'm primarily located in Seattle, but our team is sort of spread out. We've got some researchers in Seattle, a few in Utah, some in California. So, yeah, so we're not we're a small but mighty team, and we do the user experience research on our Qualtrics features and products, which includes doing kind of more tactical research in terms of understanding how easy our features, specific features, are to use, among other things. But we also do a lot of what we call foundational research, which is more deeper research with having you know lots of conversations and truly trying to understand like larger problems or understand a particular type of customer or a particular scenario or set of experiences. So we kind of we cover a lot of areas, and we take this information. We work with different, we're very collaborative. We don't work in a vacuum, so we essentially work with our stakeholders, which are PMs, engineers, UX designers, and as a team, we kind of coordinate their UX research roadmaps each quarter and then execute on the research that they need.
Perfect. I think that's a great summation for our community members who are listening. And I think our community members will really be fascinated by the work you do and the work your team does and how it impacts the end user experience
Hmm.
for our customers. And I feel like I should also highlight you have a PhD in this field, so you are truly an expert when it comes to all things UX. Um, if you don't mind, why don't we just cover some of the basics and talk a little bit about the types of things that you and your team work on, the day-to-day of your research,
Hmm.
and how you action your findings, or how Qualtrics actions findings based on the research you and your team does.
Yep. Yeah. So basically, the way we work with our teams is, again, we sit with our key stakeholders. It's usually a PM, and we do this on a quarterly basis, more or less, the way we do our usual planning. Although we do have some wiggle room for, we get a lot of ad hoc requests that come, just weren't planned on initially, but became kind of like a hot topic. And so we cover a lot of different bases, and we have other mechanisms that help us also cover areas that we may not have the bandwidth to But we really believe very strongly in making data-driven decisions when it comes to the design and usage of all the features and so on. And so I guess on a like day to day, I would say for one of our just IC individual contributor researchers, they typically, like I said, the cycle is where we start at the start of the quarter when there's a lot of product planning in general happening. We sit with our different PMs and people who are making those plans and figuring out their quarterly product roadmap, and then it's almost like it's a little bit of negotiation that happens, I want to say, because there's so many projects and there's so many things that we get requests for research, but we can't do them all.
Hmm.
um, so we go through a pretty intense prioritization stage.
Yeah.
Once we've figured out and understood the priorities from the product team, they'll just kind of get going and, hit on whatever project it is, figure out what the research problem is, what is the objective that, what does our stakeholder want to get out of the research, what kind of decisions do they need this data to be able to make. Um, what are their own hypotheses about how users will behave or perceive and things like that, so that we can form the study as a real, almost like an experiment where we are testing the hypothesis
Right.
and it's either true or it isn't. So we go through that. When I say we, I mean just typical researchers will go through this process of kind of understanding the scope, the problem, what the outputs should be, what will actually be used to make decisions is really important, because oftentimes we're asked to study or get data, but it ends up being like for the sake of what, we'll present the results, and presenting data that doesn't isn't very actionable is not really what we don't do that. It's
Right.
not
Of
it's
course.
not right. It's not This isn't an academic exercise.
Right.
So we have to make sure everything's really actionable with good recommendations that are backed up and make sense.
Mhm.
So we'll start with planning this planning phase, and that's where the researcher will also determine kind of what's the best research method to use.
Mhm.
Um, Again, depending on a lot of different criteria. It could depend on how much time we have to get the data to them. It can depend on how much money or budget we have, because
Right.
it's not cheap to run some of these studies.
Absolutely not.
And Yeah, and then kind of just general kind of understanding what the parameters are, and then we can then determine, how we're going to execute on this.
Right.
Um, so yeah, and so then they'll go and they will, once all these decisions are made, they will also go through the process um, of recruiting participants for our studies, because our
Mhm.
studies are, they actually require talking to people,
Of
or
course.
sending them surveys, or yeah, exactly. Um, so we then also do, I would say the recruitment piece of it is probably the most time consuming, believe it or not, out of the whole thing. So we do that and then conduct the research. The researcher looks at the data, analyzes it, interprets the findings, and then takes that, packages it up into a nice report, and shares it out with their stakeholder team. So what happens after that? It's kind of it's an interesting handoff, because we did some research on our own, just within on our own PMs and stakeholders, to find out how long does it take for them to kind of process what we've given them,
Mhm.
and then kind of realize, and then maybe understand what they will do with it, if anything.
Right. Right.
Um, so we created this system called impact tracking, and basically it's designed. Of course, we send it through Qualtrics automatically, a survey to all the stakeholders of a particular research project, and ask them very specific questions about how did that project go for you, like what changes are you going to make based on it, what was the impact, and so on, so that at least for our team we get some feedback, we can then kind of refine our processes and learn from, and kind of understand like what are they really looking for.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like the cycle, I would say, a typical cycle.
That's fantastic. That's very interesting background. I don't know that all of our listeners or all of our community members necessarily understand the work that these teams do. And
Mhm.
I hope it's not a gross oversimplification, but to me, it sounds like the overall goal of the research, the findings, the action items is to improve the user experience in the end, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so this is, we of course are an experience management company, and
Hmm.
we are required to hold ourselves to a high bar as such. And so I think this really demonstrates that Qualtrics is not only committed to the user experience and practicing what we preach, but also hopefully showing that we are somewhat ahead of the curve in the tech industry. Can you possibly speak a little bit to how the work that the Qualtrics UX team does compares to the work that maybe other enterprise tech companies are doing, or the similar work that's happening in the tech world?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can speak to I've worked at other companies before coming to Qualtrics, and in all
Mhm.
of those companies, I was actually an independent contributor. So
Mhm.
I was actually kind of in the weeds doing the research. And I would say the differences are not huge in terms of day to day. I would say that certain companies, a lot of it really depends on where you are and like what the culture is in that organization. And so I could be working at like a Microsoft or an Amazon, and they have many, many, many UX research teams in all different parts of the organization. And so it can be, it depends on the maturity of the team that you're working in, honestly, because there are UX and UX research and UX design are well known, and companies with a certain level of maturity
Mhm.
well, usually, I mean, usually UX design tends to be seen as kind of like higher priority than UX research because you need a design, right?
Right.
um, but there are companies that are very, in my opinion, very UX research, pretty high in the UX research maturity scale.
Mhm.
Um, so places, I would say Microsoft is a good example of that. They're very kind of mature
Mhm.
around UX research. They invest in it quite a bit.
Mhm.
Um, and at Qualtrics, I would say it's a little different because we are a much smaller company, so we
Mhm.
don't have multiple UX research programs throughout.
Mhm.
And so I think that in that sense, I actually like it better because then I know like we have one core team and it's supporting everything pretty much. And so we don't there's less there's less chance of competing I don't know, initiatives
Right.
or things like that. We sort of can have, kind of a handle on everything that's going on, which is really important with a
Mhm.
company like
Mhm.
Qualtrics that has so many different, I mean, not so much, but different pieces to it. So we have
Right.
our CX product, we have EX, we have,
Yes.
and we have design XM, and then we have
Right. Right.
and then we have the platform pieces, which are our surveys and our dashboards and so on. And there's so much kind of commingling between all of these pieces that I think that the model we have here at Qualtrics for UX research in terms of the organization and the team is pretty optimal because we kind
Yeah.
of all we're close, we're small enough that we all know who's working on what. We can see where there may be crossover, where there might be redundancy. And in that sense, I feel like we have we have a really good, strong team that works really well with really, all of the other components of Qualtrics, which would be, our project management and engineering and design. So
Yeah.
And we're growing. I mean, we weren't always very mature in terms of UX research.
Hmm.
When I joined about 3.5 years ago,
Hmm.
the team wasn't very, I don't know, it just didn't really have a good sense, I think, of control over what was happening around them, and kind of understanding how to really serve our stakeholders, and so on. And in those 3 years, I feel like our maturity, UX research maturity within the company itself, has really improved substantially.
Yeah,
We've
absolutely.
gone from being very reactive and kind of dissecting individual little features, to actually doing research on kind of a larger scope, larger areas. Understanding real scenarios, understanding, users and how they see things, what's important to them, how they react, to just different aspects of what they're doing, and how they're trying to work with Qualtrics to meet their goals. So I would say that right now, yeah, there's always, we could always improve. There's always room to, get better at it. But I would say that, like our product org has really um, become very receptive to the work that our team is doing over the last
Yeah,
3 years. And so it's been really great.
absolutely.
Yeah.
You brought up a point that is connected to something that's been on my mind for a while now, which is how people react to certain product features or
Hmm.
interacting with a product. Um, and you're somebody who's much closer to this because you've dedicated your career to this topic, and I am more of a pedestrian observer. But it seems to me that people have become much more tech savvy uh,
Hmm.
in a very short amount of time. I'm thinking compared to where we were, say, 2010 or even 2015.
Yep.
And it's interesting to watch people, in my experience, get frustrated with technology. For example, at the airport kiosk, when you're trying to do the self check in and it's not
Hmm.
working as expected, or if you're trying to navigate using an app on your phone, it seems like our standards for technology and UX as a society are much higher now.
Oh, yeah.
We are surrounded by tech all the time. And because the industry is evolving and improving and becoming more attuned to people's needs. Um,
Hmm.
so, not that I enjoy watching people get frustrated. I should, with technology, I should clarify what I'm trying to say. I think it's
Hmm.
interesting, really, the reflection I'm trying to share is I think it's interesting that we as a society collectively, I think globally, have a much higher standard for UX now than we
Yep.
did previously. Does that ring true for you at all?
Oh, yeah. Yes, yeah, I mean, now we're at a point, like, I've been doing this for, oof, decades. Um, Actually, it's funny you mentioned my PhD. When I got my PhD, there was no UX wasn't even a thing. There was no real, no one used that terminology. Like, I'm a dinosaur when it comes to this stuff. So yeah. So when UX, I would say you're right. I mean, back in the day, it wasn't as much about, making it a pleasant or fun or engaging experience. It was more about making sure people could finish their task,
Right.
and not struggle too much with it. But now with, technology obviously has just, and it continues to get more and more and exponentially better and less, easier to use and more intuitive. And that aspect of technology is a big part of it,
Mhm.
the user experience. And
Right.
since it's so easy now for, companies to create and spin up competing products,
Mhm.
apps, even Qualtrics, I mean, we have
Yeah.
competitors, right?
Mhm.
And so now it's kind of like a race to
Yeah,
see who can be
exactly.
first to market with
Mhm.
anything. And so, but we also want to pay attention to, obviously, the user experience as well, because right now, I mean, there we have, competitors who pretty much offer exactly functionally the same things, right? What makes one better than the other? What makes one stickier than the other, right? And that's where I think it comes down to that's where the user experience does factor in a major way.
Yeah.
Because obviously, if you have one product that's easier to use, more intuitive, doesn't give, anyone anxiety or worry, and there's trust. Obviously, that's probably what people are going to use and purchase.
Yeah.
Maybe, I mean, most things considered, I know price is a big part of it too.
Of course.
Um, but that's kind of like, the kind of like this intense competition and this replication of the same sort of, competing products is where, UX has gone from being kind of like a testing functionally that, people, a human being in this system can get to, do what they're set out to do.
Mhm.
And now it's become more of like, do they love it? Like, do they,
Right.
is it,
Exactly.
so it's a different, it, so UX has now become part, I want to say there's definitely the cognitive psychology aspect to it,
Yes.
but there's also sort of this like emotional
Yeah.
piece as
Like
well.
a brand
Um,
affinity, sort of.
Right,
Yeah.
right. We were actually looking at how do people want to feel when they're using
Uh-huh.
this. And
Yeah.
so, if you'd asked me 30 years ago as an industrial psychology student, like, so do you care about feelings and well, we'd be like, what are you talking about? No. We're not clinical psychologists.
Right. Right.
Um,
Exactly.
but now it is kind of, and that's kind of how things are changing. So there's definitely the science is still there,
Yeah.
but it's definitely become a lot more complicated
Yeah.
in light of, also the technology, the impact. There's other constraints that we deal with too. Um, and a lot of them are technological. So we'll come up with recommendations, things that customers feel strongly about that they want in their experience or that they don't want in their experience, but we can't, that doesn't guarantee that we can even make those changes because there's the technology piece, which
Yeah.
again, so that now we're bringing in dollars and cents and investment,
Mhm.
and how much time will it take to make these changes. So it's become definitely it's not, it definitely is there to help design the product, but there's also, that the impact we have isn't, we can't just say like, this is terrible, change it to this, and they do it.
Right.
There's a lot more that goes on.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In our last remaining few minutes together, I'd like to talk a little bit about how community members or Qualtrics customers who are listening to this podcast can get involved in the UX research panels that are currently taking place. You mentioned earlier in our discussion that recruiting people to take part in panels can sometimes be a heavy lift. How can the community get involved?
I love that question. This is my favorite question. We would love to have every every Qualtrics users be part of our panel. And so, um, as you mentioned, our team has a UX research participation panel,
Mhm.
and customers, users, even if you're not a customer or user and you have an interest in this area or are using other products in this area, um, we welcome you to join our panel. And so essentially, I wish I don't have the URL on me right now, but Michael, you
Yeah,
can probably pull that up at some point.
absolutely. I will
But
add it to the notes in this podcast, the podcast description.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, we do have a page in the Qualtrics marketing site
Mhm.
where it explains what it means to be part of our UX research panel and how you can be a participant in our studies. So basically, you would go into a survey link we have in there, which is basically just an intake survey, just to learn a little bit about what are the products you use, a little bit about your role, things like that. Not a very long survey. And that survey will then opt you into being in our panel. And by being a part of our panel, you will potentially, again, it all depends on what studies we're running and who we are looking for. Um, but it basically says that to us that we can reach out to you at
Mhm.
some point if there's a study that we feel you are the right person to give us the information or the or speak to the topic that
Yeah.
we're talking about. Um, I would say that it's hard to say. We try not to. We do have a rule where we don't reach out to people um, within 2 or 3 months if they've already been a participant. So we're
Okay.
not going to, annoy you and bug you. Um,
Right. We don't want to do
and
that.
right, exactly. So yeah, it's really the only thing that we ask again is, you may or may not get a request or an email from us asking if you would be interested in being a study participant. You can say no.
Mhm.
We'd love for you to say yes.
Yeah.
We would then, we also explain what's involved. So usually it's either it's usually one of two things. It'll either be a survey, so there's really no it's on your time and you can just do the survey,
Mhm.
or it will be something a bit more well, there's two things to it. There's what we call moderated and unmoderated sessions. So
Okay.
a moderated session is where we would want to hop on a Zoom call with
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
and then just kind of guide a discussion and ask questions, and or it could be even a workshop. It could even be a focus
Right.
group. It could be
Right.
anything like that. And then we have unmoderated research where we will send you a link to one of our research tools where you can record your responses to a set of questions that are just presented to you. So there's really no direct interaction with a researcher in that sense. And again, you can do that when at your convenience. So
Mhm.
those are kind of the flavors, and so probably the most involved kind of study would be one where we are asking you to set up a session and sit down with us. Usually, we try to not go over an hour per
Mhm.
session. Um, for most studies, we do offer a gratuity,
Uh-huh.
like a gift card. We have a whole bunch of gift card choices, things like that. Yeah, and so and yeah, and I think that for our participants, they really love just kind of getting to see what we're thinking about,
Yeah,
maybe seeing some early designs of for
absolutely.
interfaces and features we're working on. And yeah, it's a lot of people really enjoy actually being part of it, and of course, we are just so thankful for getting the participation.
Yeah, I think taking part in the surveys and the research is just in and of itself a reward, separate
Hmm.
from the additional gifting of gift cards and things like that. I
Hmm.
do also think I will resurface it on the community, but we have a post from last year that we authored talking about how to get involved, how to get in touch with your team, how
Hmm.
to get involved in research panels. So we will absolutely resurface that article as well.
Great.
And I will make sure that that's also available in the comments for this podcast, and also for on this post on the community and on YouTube where this
Yeah.
video will live as
Oh,
well.
awesome. Yeah, I believe that we actually have the link to that intake survey in
Yeah,
that post.
I think
So,
we do. I think we do.
hmm
Perfect. Well, Sabina, it's been fabulous to talk to you as always. I always love to hear about your expertise and pick your brain on topics like this. So thank you very much for agreeing to speak with us and be a
yeah,
part of this podcast series.
yeah. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, no, I love it, and you've been so awesome to work with, and I so appreciate all the kind of giving us this platform to to reach
Absolutely.
out, and yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Our team loves working with your team as well.
Great.
All right. Thanks, Sabina.
All right, thank you.